Nathan Pierce tightened his grip on the wrench, his breath coming out in short, frustrated bursts as he tried to loosen the rusted bolt under the hood of his old truck. A cold gust of wind blew through the nearly empty gas station lot, making him shiver inside his worn-out jacket. The last thing he needed was for this truck to break down again. It was his only means of getting his 5-year-old daughter, Lily, to school and making it to his 2 jobs. He was about to give it one last try when he heard the unmistakable sound of an engine failing to start. Across the lot, a sleek black luxury car sat motionless, its driver repeatedly turning the key with no success. The woman inside let out a frustrated sigh, pushing open the door and stepping out. Nathan blinked. She didn't look like someone who belonged in this run-down part of town. Her coat alone, a cream-colored designer piece that probably cost more than his rent, screamed money. But her expression wasn't one of arrogance or impatience. She looked completely lost. Nathan wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward her. "Need some help." The woman glanced up, startled, her striking blue eyes locking onto his. Yeah, it won't start, and I have no idea what's wrong." "Pop the hood," Nathan said, rolling up his sleeves. "I'll take a look." She hesitated for only a second before nodding and reaching back inside to release the hood. Nathan lifted it and inspected the engine, his trained eye immediately spotting the issue. "Your battery connections are loose. Should be an easy fix." The woman let out a breath of relief. "Thank you. I was worried I'd be stuck here for hours." He gave a small shrug. "You got lucky I was around." She smiled, and for some reason, that small gesture made something tighten in his chest. "I guess I did." Nathan worked quickly, securing the connections before stepping back. "Try it now." She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Her face lit up as she turned back to him. "You're a lifesaver." He wiped his hands again, offering a small nod. "No problem." She stepped out of the car again, reaching into her coat pocket. "Let me pay you for your time." Nathan's jaw tensed. He wasn't a charity case. "I don't need your money." Her brows lifted slightly, as if his response surprised her. "I insist." "I insist you save it," he said firmly. "Just pay it forward to someone else." For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to figure him out. Then, slowly, she smiled a real, genuine smile. "All right, I will." Nathan nodded, turning back toward his truck. He didn't need to stick around and make small talk with a woman who clearly lived in a different world than his. But before he could take another step, her voice stopped him. "I'm Fiona Orton, by the way." He glanced back. "Nathan Pierce." Fiona hesitated, then said, "Thank you again, Nathan." And with that, she slipped back into her car and drove off, leaving Nathan standing in the cold, wondering why a simple interaction with a stranger had managed to make his day feel a little less exhausting. What he didn't know was that Fiona Orton wasn't just any woman. She was a millionaire one who had just found herself unexpectedly intrigued by the struggling single dad who had refused her money. Nathan didn't think much about the encounter after Fiona drove away. He had too much on his plate to dwell on a random stranger, no matter how striking her blue eyes were. His focus remained on keeping food on the table for Lily and making sure she never felt the weight of their struggles. That evening, after picking her up from school, he set a bowl of macaroni and cheese in front of her. She dug in eagerly, her curls bouncing as she kicked her legs under the table. "Daddy, guess what?" she said through a mouthful of noodles. "What's up, Peanut?" Nathan leaned on his elbow, exhaustion creeping in. "We have career day next week. You have to come." Her excitement made his chest tighten. He hesitated. His jobs weren't exactly the kind that impressed a room full of kids. Fixing cars at the garage and stocking shelves at the grocery store weren't the dream professions that got little kids excited. "What kind of jobs are other parents talking about?" he asked carefully. Lily's face lit up. Emma's dad is a doctor, and Jason's mom flies airplanes. Nathan forced a smile. Sounds cool. You're cool too, Daddy. You fix things, that's important. Her unwavering belief in him made his throat tighten. He reached across the table and ruffled her curls. I'll be there, Peanut. She beamed and went back to eating. Across the city, Fiona sat in her high-rise apartment, staring out at the twinkling skyline. The encounter at the gas station lingered in her mind longer than it should have. Nathan Pierce was unlike anyone in her usual social circle. He had turned down her money without hesitation, something she rarely experienced. Her assistant, Olivia, knocked lightly before stepping inside. The investor meeting is confirmed for Friday morning, Olivia said, and the gala Saturday night. Cancel the gala, Fiona interrupted. Olivia raised a brow. You never skip those. Fiona shrugged, not in the mood for another night of forced conversations. Then, what do you want me to do with the tickets? Give them to charity. Let someone else enjoy it. Olivia studied her for a moment. You seem distracted. Fiona hesitated. Bringing up a mechanic who had helped her in a gas station parking lot wasn't exactly something her assistant needed to hear. It's nothing, she said, brushing the thought away. Except it wasn't nothing. The next afternoon, Nathan was elbow deep in an engine when the garage door chimed. He wiped his hands on a rag and turned, expecting a customer. Instead, Fiona Orton stood just inside the shop, looking completely out of place among the grease-streaked walls and scent of motor oil. Nathan blinked. What are you doing here? She smiled, holding up a coffee cup. Figured since you wouldn't take my money, you might accept a cup of coffee instead. His brows pulled together. You tracked me down over a cup of coffee. I asked around, she admitted. Small town, people talk. He hesitated before taking the cup. It was warm against his fingers. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to. Nathan studied her. She wasn't wearing the expensive coat this time, just a simple sweater and jeans. Her presence still felt out of place next to the rusted toolboxes and grease-stained floors. He took a sip, the rich coffee warming his throat. So, what's a woman like you really doing in a place like this? Fiona tilted her head. What do you mean a woman like me? He gestured vaguely. You don't exactly look like someone who hangs around auto shops. She grinned. Maybe I like surprises. Nathan shook his head, amused despite himself. You're something else. Fiona leaned against a workbench. So, do you always turn down money when people offer it? He set the coffee down. I don't take handouts. It wasn't a handout, it was gratitude. Same thing. She studied him, as if trying to figure out what made him tick. You're stubborn. Nathan let out a short laugh. And you're persistent. Fiona shrugged, guilty. A sudden honk outside made them both turn. One of the other mechanics waved at Nathan, motioning toward a waiting car. I should get back to work, Nathan said. Fiona nodded but didn't move immediately. Maybe I'll see you around. Nathan exhaled, shaking his head. I have a feeling you will. As Fiona walked away, he found himself watching her go, wondering why a woman like her was making such an effort to talk to him. And why he didn't mind. Nathan didn't expect to see Fiona again so soon. But 3 days after she had shown up at the garage with coffee, she was back this time sitting on the hood of a car outside the shop, waiting as his shift wrapped up. The sight of her there, so effortlessly out of place against the backdrop of grease-streaked mechanics and roaring engines, made something tighten in his chest. You're persistent, Nathan said as he wiped his hands on a rag. Fiona swung her legs slightly, casual, as if she belonged there. You already said that. He raised a brow, and you still haven't denied it. She grinned. I came to make a proposition. Nathan crossed his arms, wary. If it involves money, I'm not interested. Fiona rolled her eyes. It doesn't, it involves dinner. His stomach clenched. He hadn't been on a real date in years, not since Lily's mother walked out. And he doubted Fiona was the kind of woman who settled for greasy diner burgers and fries. I don't think. It's not a date, she interrupted, as if reading his hesitation. Think of it as a thank you dinner, my way of paying it forward. You can't say no to that, can you? Nathan exhaled, glancing toward the shop. He could feel the stares of his coworkers. If he agreed to this, he knew exactly what they'd assume. And yet, the idea of spending an evening with Fiona, outside of the shop and the random encounters, was more tempting than he wanted to admit. Fine, he said finally, but pick the place. Fiona's lips curled in amusement. Deal. Nathan took her to a small, family-owned restaurant on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, didn't have a 5-star menu, but the food was good and the atmosphere was comfortable. When they walked in, the owner, Maria, greeted Nathan warmly. 2 tonight, she asked, glancing curiously at Fiona. Nathan nodded, pulling out a chair for Fiona before sitting across from her. Maria disappeared into the kitchen, leaving them in the cozy, dimly lit space. So, Fiona said, leaning forward slightly, tell me about yourself, Nathan Pierce. He chuckled, I'm not that interesting. She tilted her head, I doubt that. Nathan hesitated. He wasn't used to people wanting to know more about him, not beyond what was necessary. But something about Fiona made him let his guard down, just a little. I grew up here, he admitted, never left. My dad was a mechanic, so I learned early. Work hard, keep my head down, that's about it. Fiona's expression softened, but she didn't press. Instead, she offered something of her own. I grew up in New York, she said. My parents were always working too busy building their empire to notice much else. I was sent to boarding schools, expected to follow in their footsteps. Nathan studied her, and did you? She exhaled. For a while. I did everything right, got the degrees, took over part of the business, made millions. But somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't even know why I was doing it anymore. Everything felt empty. Nathan frowned. So why do it? Fiona tapped her fingers against the table. Because it's all I know, and because walking away isn't that simple. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but thick with understanding. Maria returned with their meals, placing a steaming plate of roasted chicken and vegetables in front of Fiona. Nathan had opted for his usual a burger and fries. Fiona eyed his plate with amusement. Not a risk taker, are you? He smirked, I know what I like. As they ate, conversation flowed easily. Fiona asked about Lily, and for the first time in a long while, Nathan found himself talking about his daughter without the weight of stress pressing down on him. She's everything to me, he admitted. Smart, stubborn, gets that from me. Fiona smiled. She's lucky to have you. Something in her tone made him pause. It wasn't pity, it was admiration. And for the first time, Nathan allowed himself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Fiona Orton wasn't as out of reach as he thought. After dinner, as they stepped outside, the night air was crisp, the sky littered with stars. I had a good time, Fiona said, tucking her hands into her coat pockets. Nathan glanced at her. Yeah, me too. She hesitated, then asked, would it be crazy if I said I wanted to see you again? Nathan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Probably, he admitted, but I don't think I'd mind. Fiona grinned. Good. And with that, she turned, walking toward her car, leaving Nathan standing on the sidewalk, wondering how in the hell a simple favor at a gas station had led to this. Nathan wasn't sure how it happened, but Fiona became a constant presence in his life. At first, it was small things, her showing up at the garage with coffee, inviting him to grab a bite to eat after work, even stopping by the grocery store where he stocked shelves late at night just to say hello. It should have felt strange, a woman like her weaving her way into his world, but instead, it felt inevitable. He had spent so long keeping his guard up, convinced that letting someone in would only lead to disappointment. But Fiona wasn't like anyone else. She didn't pry when he didn't want to talk, didn't judge him for his worn-out boots or the fact that his paycheck barely stretched far enough to cover rent. She just looked at him like he was worth knowing. Nathan wasn't sure what she saw in him, but with every passing day, he found himself wanting to believe in the possibility of something more. One afternoon, Fiona showed up at the garage again, leaning against the doorway with a look that was impossible to ignore. Nathan wiped his hands on a rag and raised an eyebrow. "You do realize this isn't the kind of place most people visit for fun, right?" Fiona shrugged. "Maybe I'm not most people." He chuckled, tossing the rag onto a workbench. "That's becoming pretty obvious." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I have something planned tonight, but you have to trust me." Nathan narrowed his eyes. "That sounds dangerous." "Only if you hate surprises." He sighed, shaking his head. "I don't have time for fancy restaurants or whatever it is you've got in mind." Fiona reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his. "It's not about fancy, just say yes." Nathan hesitated, then exhaled. "Fine, but if this involves tuxedos, I'm out." She laughed, squeezing his fingers before pulling away. "See you tonight." Nathan wasn't prepared for what Fiona had planned. When she picked him up, she didn't take him to a restaurant or some high-end event. Instead, she drove them to a quiet stretch of land just outside the city, where a small picnic had been set up beneath the open sky. A few lanterns flickered, casting a soft glow over the blankets spread out on the grass. Nathan stared in disbelief. "This is what you planned." Fiona stepped out of the car, removing her shoes as she walked toward the setup. "You said no tuxedos." He shook his head, following her. "I was expecting something extravagant." She sat down, looking up at him with a soft expression. "Maybe I wanted something simple." Nathan lowered himself onto the blanket, studying her. "Why?" Fiona hesitated, then said, "Because this is real, and I like real." Nathan had no response to that. He just watched as she reached for the basket, pulling out a container of food. "I made this myself," she said, opening it. He raised an eyebrow. "You can cook." Fiona laughed. "I had some help, but yes, I can cook. Try it before you judge." Nathan took a bite, and to his surprise, it was good. Better than good. He nodded. "All right, I'll admit it, you didn't burn it." Fiona rolled her eyes. High praise. They ate in comfortable silence, the night air cool but not cold. Nathan found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. After a while, Fiona leaned back on her elbows, gazing up at the sky. "Do you ever think about what you'd do if things were different?" Nathan exhaled, stretching his legs out. "Like what?" "If money wasn't an issue, if you could do anything." He thought about it, then said, "I'd open my own shop. Somewhere small, nothing fancy. Just a place where people could come, get honest work done, and not have to worry about getting cheated." Fiona turned her head toward him, interest sparking in her eyes. "You've thought about this before." "Yeah," Nathan admitted, "but thinking and doing are two different things." Fiona sat up, crossing her legs. "What if you could?" Nathan huffed a laugh. "And where exactly would find the money to make that happen?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand again, lacing her fingers with his. "You don't always have to do everything alone, Nathan." His chest tightened. He had spent so long carrying the weight of everything on his own, never letting anyone in. But Fiona wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't offering charity or pity. She just wanted him to see that maybe, just maybe, there was another way. For the first time in years, Nathan let himself believe that maybe he didn't have to keep his walls up forever. A week later, Fiona arrived at the garage with a glint in her eye that immediately put Nathan on edge. He wiped his hands on a rag, narrowing his gaze. "What did you do?" She grinned, holding up a set of keys. "Come with me." Nathan sighed but followed her outside. When he saw the building across the street, his breath caught. The old, vacant shop that had been empty for years now had a sign in the window. Pierce Auto Repair. Nathan turned to Fiona, his heart pounding. "What is this?" Her expression softened. "It's yours." He shook his head. "Fiona, I." She placed a hand on his chest, stopping him. "Let me explain. I didn't buy it for you, found an investor. Someone who believes in what you want to do. The lease is in your name. The loan is manageable. This is your chance, Nathan." He swallowed hard, emotions warring inside him. He had spent his entire life fighting for every inch, never expecting anyone to help. But Fiona wasn't just anyone. He reached for her, cupping her face in his hands. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Because I love you." Nathan's breath hitched. He had been fighting it, ignoring it, but he couldn't anymore. He leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that held every unspoken feeling between them. When he pulled back, his voice was rough with emotion. "I love you too." Fiona smiled, resting her forehead against his. "Then take the chance, Nathan. Build something for yourself." For the first time in a long time, he believed he could. And for the first time ever, he knew he wouldn't have to do it alone. Nathan stepped into the empty garage, the keys to his new shop heavy in his hand. The space smelled of dust and old oil, but beneath that was the scent of possibility. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the concrete floors that would soon be filled with cars, workbenches, and the steady hum of an honest day's work. Fiona stood beside him, watching his expression carefully. Nathan exhaled, letting his fingers trail over the edge of the counter where a register would eventually sit. "This is real," he said, his voice low, almost disbelieving. Fiona nodded. "It is." He turned to her, his jaw tight with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." She shook her head. "You already have, by believing you deserve this." Nathan swallowed hard, his chest tightening. He had spent so many years scraping by, never allowing himself to dream beyond the next paycheck. Now, for the first time, the future wasn't just something to endure, it was something to build. But before he could say more, the sound of small footsteps echoed through the open space. Lily burst through the door, her curls bouncing as she scanned the shop with wide eyes. "Daddy, this is yours." Nathan crouched down, opening his arms as she ran into them. "Yeah, Peanut, it's ours." She pulled back, looking up at him with a grin. "Can I help?" Fiona crouched beside them, tucking a stray curl behind Lily's ear. "I think your dad's going to need a very important assistant." Lily's face lit up. "I can be the boss." Nathan chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Let's start with assistant to the boss, all right." She nodded eagerly, then turned to Fiona. "Are you going to work here too?" Fiona hesitated, glancing at Nathan. "I think Fiona has her own work to do, Peanut," Nathan said gently. Lily frowned, "But I like her." Fiona smiled, brushing a hand over Lily's shoulder. "I like you too." Nathan exhaled, standing and lifting Lily into his arms. "All right, Peanut, let's get home and make dinner." Fiona followed them outside, pausing as Nathan buckled Lily into the truck. When he turned back to her, she was watching him with something unreadable in her eyes. "You okay?" he asked. For the first time since he met her, Fiona looked uncertain. "I have to go back to New York for a few days." Nathan's stomach twisted. He had known she would leave eventually. Her world was 1,000 miles from his. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow." He nodded slowly. "Business." She exhaled, "And family." Nathan studied her face, the tension in her jaw, the way her hands curled into fists at her sides. "You don't want to go," he observed. She let out a soft laugh, but there was no humor in it. "No, but I have to." Nathan considered her for a long moment, then reached out, taking her hand. "You'll come back." Fiona's eyes met his, something vulnerable flickering in them. "You sure about that?" He squeezed her fingers. "I am." She swallowed, nodding. "Then I will." Nathan didn't doubt her, not for a second. The morning Fiona left, Nathan woke with a weight in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He dropped Lily off at school, then spent the day gutting the new shop, scrubbing floors, setting up what little equipment he had. By evening, his muscles ached, but the space was beginning to look like something real. Still, every time he glanced at his phone, a part of him hoped for a message from Fiona. She had only been gone a day, but already, the absence of her presence was sharp. Lily noticed too. That night, as he tucked her into bed, she frowned up at him. "Is Fiona coming back soon?" Nathan smoothed a hand over her hair. "Yeah, hey, Peanut, she is." Lily's brow furrowed. "Are you sure?" Nathan nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, baby, I'm sure." Lily studied him for a moment, then curled into her blankets. "Good, 'cause she makes you happy." Nathan's breath caught. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Go to sleep, boss." But as he sat on the couch later that night, staring at his phone, he realized Lily was right. Fiona made him happy, and that scared the hell out of him. 3 days passed before Fiona finally called. Nathan answered on the first ring, his chest tightening at the sound of her voice. "Hey," she said, soft but tired. "How's New York?" There was a long pause, then suffocating. Nathan leaned against the counter, gripping the phone tighter. "What happened?" Fiona exhaled. "My parents aren't exactly thrilled about me spending time in a small town with a mechanic." Nathan's jaw tightened. "They think I'm not good enough for you." "They don't know you," Fiona said firmly, "and they never will if I let them dictate my life." Nathan hesitated. "So what do you want?" The line was quiet for a moment, then Fiona's voice came through, steady and sure. "I want to come home." Nathan's chest ached at the word. "Then do it." "Tomorrow." Nathan let out a slow breath. "I'll be waiting." The next afternoon, Nathan stood outside the garage, his hands shoved into his pockets as Fiona's car pulled into the lot. The second she stepped out, he knew, she wasn't just visiting. She was staying. Fiona walked toward him, her expression unreadable. "Told them." Nathan searched her face. "Told them what?" "That I'm not coming back." Something inside him steadied. "You sure?" Fiona reached for his jacket, tugging him closer. "I've never been more sure of anything." Nathan exhaled, wrapping his arms around her. "Good, because I wasn't going to let you go." She smiled against his chest. "I was counting on that." Nathan kissed her then, deep and certain, knowing that for the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. And he wasn't doing it alone. Nathan stood in the newly renovated Pierce Auto Repair, the scent of fresh paint blending with the familiar aroma of motor oil. The shop was finally his, fully stocked and ready to open its doors to customers. He ran a hand over the polished counter, exhaling slowly. It had taken weeks of hard work, but it was real. Fiona leaned against the doorway, watching him with quiet satisfaction. "You look like a man who just found solid ground." He turned to her, taking in the way she fit into his world so effortlessly, despite coming from a life so different from his own. "It doesn't feel real yet." She stepped forward, placing a hand on his chest. "Then let me remind you." He pulled her closer, pressing a lingering kiss against her forehead. "You already have." Lily burst in from the side door, her small hands clutching a clipboard nearly half her size. "Okay, Daddy, I made a list of everything we need for opening day. We have to tell all your friends," and she paused, glancing at Fiona. "And Fiona's friends too." Fiona crouched beside her. "I think your dad's going to have so many customers, we won't even need to make calls." Lily's eyes widened. "Really?" Nathan chuckled. "Really, Peanut?" Fiona tapped the clipboard. "But I like your planning skills. Maybe you can teach me a thing or two about lists." Lily beamed. "I'll make you one right now." Watching them together, Nathan felt something settle deep inside him. He had spent so long keeping people at a distance, convinced that love was a fleeting thing. But Fiona had become part of his life in a way that felt unshakable. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Nathan found Fiona sitting on the porch of his home, staring up at the sky. He stepped outside, the cool night air wrapping around them. "You thinking about New York?" he asked, lowering himself onto the step beside her. She shook her head. "No, I'm thinking about here, about what comes next." Nathan studied her profile, the way the moonlight softened her features. "I was hoping you'd say that." Fiona turned to him, something unreadable in her gaze. "I spent my whole life chasing things that never really mattered. But this," she gestured around them, "this matters." Nathan reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against the small velvet box that had been weighing on his mind for days. He exhaled slowly, then shifted, dropping to one knee. Fiona's breath hitched. "Nathan." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "I don't have a private jet or a penthouse, but I have this shop, this town, and a whole lot of love for you. And if that's enough, then marry me." Tears welled in Fiona's eyes as she let out a shaky laugh. "You idiot." Nathan's brow furrowed. Not exactly the response I was hoping for. She cupped his face, her fingers warm against his skin. "Of course it's enough. You're enough. Yes, Nathan, I'll marry you." Relief and love surged through him as he slid the ring onto her finger, sealing their future with a kiss that left no room for doubt. Months later, the shop was thriving, and Fiona had found her own way in town, helping small businesses with their finances and offering advice to those trying to build something of their own. On a golden afternoon, in a small ceremony surrounded by the people who had become their family, Nathan and Fiona exchanged vows. Lily stood between them, clutching a tiny bouquet as she grinned up at them. "Does this mean Fiona's my mom now?" Fiona knelt, brushing a kiss over Lily's forehead. "If you'll have me." Lily threw her arms around her. "I already do." Nathan wrapped his arms around them both, holding onto the life he never thought he'd have. As they danced beneath the twinkling lights strung across the backyard, Fiona leaned into him. "So, Nathan Pierce, do you believe in happy endings now?" He pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice steady and sure. "I believe in you, and that's more than enough." And for the first time in his life, Nathan knew he had everything he'd ever need.